Hey folks, this is the Between the Interviews show where I'll provide some context, background, reflections, and recommendations associated with the Capitalism for Good philosophy. While the interviews are obviously focused on highlighting businesses and their leaders through talking about their experiences and philosophies, the Between the Interviews shows will be mostly me connecting the dots, providing some additional insight, spotlighting the things that I'm listening to, reading, and watching in order to learn more, as well as some of the why behind where I am choosing to put my dollar. These Between the Interview shows will be sprinkled in between the interviews and will be posted on the main feed, but will also be posted weekly on the Patreon in video form. So if that's your jam, head there. There's a link in the description. Hey folks, thanks so much for coming back to the Between the Interviews episode of Capitalism for Good podcast, where today, I guess just to be super probably deceivingly simple about this, I'm going to talk about why does any of this matter? To me, I'm the kind of person who's always searching for like a greater meaning or the, story behind the story. I would, and not like I can ever sit through a movie or anything, but if I did, I would want to listen to like the director's cut of it. I guess I do listen to podcasts and I do watch TV because, they're shorter and easier for my brain to digest. And so I really loved listening to the Office ladies with Pam and Angela talking about like their experience kind of behind the making of The Office. And so I guess if you put that in terms of the Between the Interviews here of Capitalism for Good, like that's kind of, I guess, what that is. That sounds so weird to compare myself to them. Although Jenna Fisher is from Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri girl over here. Well, depending on what time of my life that I am claiming at that time. But anyway, so in the fashion of the kind of behind the scenes between the interviews of this, I'll take a quick second to just kind of recap where we've been, how we got here to all of this. And, for those of you that have listened to all of them, thank you so much. I hope that this won't be super boring. I'll make it pretty quick. But for anyone who has not dabbled at all and this is where you're starting, this is what you missed. So episode 1, high level intro of my business experience and my career history and kind of generally who I am as a person and all of that kind of stuff. Then I did an interview with Shannon Masterson as the first business leader to be highlighted within the Capitalism for Good project. And there we talked about the importance of who you surround yourself with and being intentional about that when you can. But we also talked about what it's like to speak up and ask for help in certain situations, or if you have identified a gap or a need, trying to identify someone else and to speak up and ask for help in those types of situations. Do you have someone involved that already that you can just tag in there? And then I took a detour into these between the interviews. And, I will say this again, it's so great to hear from those business leaders kind of straight from their experiences and their viewpoints, their lessons learned. And while we may or may not be in their field or maybe involved in the consumer side of their field, or maybe we aren't now, but we might later, I still think that there's takeaways and through lines that we can find through the themes of all of those types of things. I also think that it's valuable to take a beat to reflect and to ingest and digest the information that we just received to try to understand a little bit of just how is that applicable to each of us. And there are things that we can take away from each of these experiences, and sometimes a part of that is to leave something behind, to be like, yeah, that wasn't for me, not super applicable, or I disagree. And I think that's totally fine and normal and kind of just the experience of like being humans in general. So the Between the Interviews show is intended to be done in that same way. While I have some really strong viewpoints and ideas about kind of the way things should be, the way things should run, and those are all based on my experiences and my history, I never want anyone else to just like blindly follow everything that I'm laying out or everything that one of these other business leaders is laying out without running it through that filter of their own lived experiences. I would rather that we all just think about and consider the impact in the context of the choices that we make on a daily basis as a result of our viewpoints, and that perhaps some of these other business leaders that we'll talk to and we'll hear from in the future, that's just just one more book on the bookshelf, just one more tool in the toolbox, just one more piece of information that you can take or leave or apply it however it does or does not apply to your life at that given time. So in these Between the Interviews episodes, sometimes at one point I'm really gonna regret naming it that, because I stumble over those words every single time, and I am also a little paranoid that that's gonna like fall through the cracks in editing and stuff, and people are gonna be like, what are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? The long and short of that is, sure have. Anyway, in some of these Between the Interviews episodes, I've talked about some of my experiences in the career field and why I am so passionate about being intentional when we're considering how we make our money. I also have used an example around the choices of how we spend our money and how that may have an impact on other aspects of life, whether that is directly or deliberate or indirectly and maybe unintentional. I also used politics in some of those examples and government, but again, because that is my jam. And it's also on display in a big way. So while it might be a turnoff or something that like makes people's stomach turn, or it might be like, so much, we're getting so much of that information already, it is big right now. So I did kind of use that lens because it's something that I thought would be relatable. Doesn't turn people off in a way? Sometimes, yeah, totally. And I get that. But again, just kind of going back to that's the context that I view the world, and I'm not really someone to shy away from having those kinds of conversations, and just hope that those types of conversations and those topics are discussed in a respectful and understanding and fact-based way, where it's important to view many, many different perspectives of how those things impact literally all of our lives. If you've listened to all of the Between the Interviews episodes to date, you've also heard me continue to use examples of how money intersects with government and the rights of women and how they make and spend their money. Again, gonna pull that back to my viewpoint. I am a woman in the business world making and spending my own money. That's an aspect of it. Additionally, I've taken a similar approach to the intersection of nonprofits, community-focused for-profits and what I've dubbed traditional businesses, specifically about the misconceptions that people may have about all of that and how those different buckets of businesses may not in reality be all of that different. Specifically, one of my points was if we're paying for overhead costs in traditional goods and services that we're purchasing, why would it make sense to refuse to do that in other aspects of our lives? It's not to say that we should all just not think about those things and blindly spend money on all of those things. I do think it's important to be thoughtful and intentional and kind of understand what is going into that. And also from the business side, it's kind of ethically and morally responsible of us to make sure that we're doing that in an efficient way, whether that is short-term efficiency, long-term efficiency, all of those things. Again, Easter eggs. We will talk about more of those things. Again, that's my jam here. So, again, why does any of this matter? From my perspective, especially when the people that I surround myself with, I don't know about you, but the people that I surround myself with are largely stretched way too thin. Way too thin when it comes to money, feeling stretched thin when it comes to time, feeling really stretched thin when it comes to just like bandwidth. I mean, again, that's a whole other thing. I don't know that I could even like wrap my brain around how we could really dig into talking about just bandwidth in general and information. You know, I think it's really important to like get more information, hence why I'm here yapping in this microphone. But you know, folks are emotionally tired, they're worn out, their bandwidth seems limited because we've got such an influx in what is seemingly an infinite amount of information. And, you know, here I go making an argument for the fact that it's important that we bring in more information. And, you know, I think when you put that into the context of people who are stretched thin, specifically in time and money that we're talking about here, like it seems kind of outrageous to even think about talking to someone who is already like feeling like they're at their limit and be like, hey, hang with me here. I have some thoughts about how if we can just take a step back whenever it makes sense for you, whenever the context or the situation arises, find even small ways to be intentional about the ways that we make and spend our money, that it may actually help free up time and money and energy and bandwidth and, you know, emotional load and all of these things in the long run. Maybe even thinking of it as an investment in the future. So, taking a note from my girl Taylor, here is an Easter egg for a future episode. I've got this analogy that I've used for years for so many different types of context and foundations, and I think that it fits in so many different places, but I'm going to use it again here for this. You're throwing away something when you're done with it, and in the moment you have two choices. You have a trash bag and a recycle bin. You can, one, be the person who either doesn't think about it at all and just immediately puts it in the trash bin, or you can be the person who says, you know, I have heard that if you put things in the recycling bin, that it doesn't really end up getting recycled and it doesn't matter at all. So why even try to do that? So you just immediately put it in the recycle bin. You could even be a version of that person who like talks a little trash on the person who ends up putting their stuff in the recycling bin. On the other side, you could be the person to take that item and throw it in the recycling bin regardless, because you think that it's better to try, even if there's not a 100% chance that that item will actually end up getting recycled in the end, or maybe there's even like a pretty small chance that that item might end up getting recycled in the end. Regardless, even that tiny chance for you, the decision, it is worth it for you and is more valuable for you to decide to put it into the recycling bin at that time. Or maybe, here's an argument here, maybe life's just a little bit less black and white than just, am I choosing the trash bin or am I choosing the recycle bin? And maybe we have so many other choices other than those two that are kind of front and center, the most visible, the most loud decisions about that. And that it may potentially take some more time or some more effort or some more thought or some more, whatever in but on the front end it might take some more, but on the back end it might increase your chances of that item actually truly getting recycled in the end if you just consider, hey, are there any other options here? Is there anything else that we can do? And maybe you see that there is a way to increase that item actually truly getting recycled in the end. You could rinse it out or wipe it out or something before you put it in the trash bin. That's also going to use some water. You got to weigh some pros and cons. That also might take using a disposable napkin that's going to go in the trash to put the recycling thing. Like, is the one thing worth the other? You can take it home or you can take it to a different location. I live down the street from a recycling center, or recycling kind of, the recycle bins that are separated. And, I think that is a better chance that is going to get actually truly recycled. So on my way past it, I'm going to stop there. That could be an option that you have. You could just take the item home. Maybe it's something that you can reuse. It's like a glass jar or something that you can reuse later in your house. Or, hear me out here, you can go after a job at the recycling center and help try to improve their business processes and their outcomes. And for some of you, I just immediately lost them because you're like, girl, that's an outrageous even like recommendation to offer. But consider that you're the person who's actually currently looking for another job and you have a background in logistics or strategic planning or a process efficiencies or something like that. Maybe actually that job that's going to take a lot more of your time and energy and all of those things is actually truly going to end up being the better choice in the long run. That's going to like significantly raise the rate that item actually gets recycled in the end. Or maybe it's not that item, but it's the future item that you're throwing away 6 months from now or something like that. My point is that analogy, in the context of the foundation outlined in the previous episodes, is intended to help better understand the lens of the Capitalism for Good episodes, as well as what to expect in the Between the Interviews episodes. So, moving forward, what does this all mean? Why does any of this matter? I'm going to put this in context directly to these Between the Interviews episodes, that they will now be accessed moving forward by supporting through Patreon. By going through Patreon for the weekly Between the Interviews episodes, it'll allow the project to continue for free for the interview episodes, available to all people as they are ready to go. The direct support will also allow the project to remain without the potential added bias of advertisers. As I've just yammered along a long time for about, we've got my own potential bias, and then those interviews will have the natural bias of whoever else is participating in it. The last thing that I want to do is add in a bias of an advertiser. It also seemed just blatantly contradictory to the point of capitalism for good if we're talking about like intentionality of these types of things, the way that we make and use our money. I couldn't kind of square that to also going after advertisers so that the project could continue, that that we're contributing to business, and then I felt like it was promoting all of those things. Anyway, in this decision, intentionally chosen that is not the way that we will go after it. So by following the Between the Interviews episodes on Patreon at patreon.com/capitalism for good, you'll directly support the project ad-free, get access to episodes exclusively through there. You'll get some stuff that will be out earlier than it might be on the main feed. Also, some other added bonuses depending on their different levels available to you as well. There's a link in the show notes and a link in the bio if you follow on Instagram at Capitalism for Good podcast as well. And this now brings me to my what am I reading is, well, technically a what have I read, and it is the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. And it's all about how the small changes in decisions and habits that we make can build to have significant impact. So the compound interest of 1% better. And that mentality of you do something small in the immediate and one day you're going to strive for 1% better, in the long run really adds up. Great book. I have heard from folks who listen to it. I almost said book on tape, but the audiobook version of it, and that they have enjoyed that as well. For me, it's also a good, like, just theory and motivating factor whenever I'm like, oh, I don't want to work out today. I don't want to eat healthier. I'm gonna choose the cheaper option, whatever. Maybe I just need to not spend money on that, whatever those decisions are. That, like, okay, but how can you choose just like the 1% better option, is a helpful reminder for me. So highly recommend that. It's also not super long. It's an easy read. It's broken up into all these sections, uses a million different examples and analogies. Highly recommend. And then, because obviously I love a good through line here, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but here is where I am putting my dollar, is directly to the creators whenever possible. And that is like tipping a musician that's playing live music at the restaurant or bar that you're going to, or buying the actual tangible book, or attending the workshop of your favorite author. It could be buying artwork of a local artist at a market. I especially love that one because this is, again, an example of just like who I am as a human being. Then you have something that is less likely to have a million other people to have it. It's more unique and more of like an exclusive item. I also just like supporting a direct creator. It's kind of cool to me to look at the person who like drew the drawing or took the photo as I'm handing my $20 or whatever it is over for that. And oh, you're the one that made this. I love this. I can imagine as a creator that is kind of fulfilling sometimes to hear folks say that. And then here's my not so subtle wink. My next one is subscribing to podcasts directly on Patreon. One of my favorites is Andrew Hickey. He is the host of A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs. And again, you want to talk about someone who's like intentional about every detail, so well researched, even intentional down to like the wording of the title of that podcast. He in one of the early episodes goes into why he chose a history versus the history, and that like this is a version, this isn't the end version. And I highly recommend him if you are into music and like the ins and outs of music and like how we got here. He is really great. He's got a free version that's out on like almost all major platforms, and then he has bonuses and extra things that you can access by subscribing to him. I have again kind of stolen from him that the model a little bit, and that he starts really small and attainable. So I'm going to steal from him again here. He's got this saying at the end of his shows that's all about how even if you just tell one other person about the podcast, spreading the word really makes a difference, even if it's just to one other person. So again, to steal that sentiment from him, and also James Clear, if you think this is up the alley of someone else, it'll mean the world to me if you just recommend it, send it to them, give them a little, hey, maybe you might like this. And then if the Capitalism for Good project is up your alley, please consider supporting and following via Patreon. It'll also mean the world to me. So thank you. All right, that is enough. Let's go leave this place better than we found it.